We talked so much about the linebackers for Pitt this season and what we expect out of the linebackers and how good we think that group is going to be. I've been talking about it all offseason about these guys. And I keep sort of throwing out there, I'm like, this is the deepest group Pat Narduzzi's had. This is the most talented linebackers Pat Narduzzi's had. Is that true? Is that accurate that it really is the deepest and most talented linebacker group that Pat Narduzzi has ever had? Here comes a legal pad examination. Lots of information here. Let's talk about Pitt's history of linebackers under Pat Narduzzi and how this year's group stacks up. What might give you confidence about this year, where there's a little bit of concern, and maybe how this group compares to the past 9 years of Pitt linebackers under Pat Narduzzi. It hasn't always been the strongest position, but it's been a position. And let's see how it stacks up this year. We'll talk about it here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Tuesday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, and you might see it. What do I got? Oh, buddy, it's home field. Home field in the house. Home field Tuesdays. HomeFieldApparel.com is the place to get all of the best Pitt gear you're going to find. You check out this shirt. Warm up the victory. It says lights down at the bottom, too. Warm up the victory lights. It's got this great sort of retro-looking helmet logo. It's retro, but it's not something you've seen before. You haven't seen a design like this before, except for when I wear it, or if you already bought it from Home Field. It's retro, it's vintage in feel, but it's immediately recognizable as Pitt. This is what Home Field does. They have great designs for like tons of schools all over the country. If you feel like you're maxed out on Pitt gear, you don't need any more Pitt stuff, well, you can get stuff for like Tulane or Hawaii. I have a sweet Hawaii Rainbow Warrior sweatshirt. You can get stuff like that because there's schools all over the country that they have at Home Field, and it's all of the highest quality. I always say this, there's two components that go into it with Home Field. They make Home Field the best purveyor of college sports gear. One, the designs and how sweet they look. And I'll have different ones that I wear, and you can check them out. But also the quality. I mean, I've had this shirt for a few years now. I mean, you guys have seen me wear this shirt on the podcast for a few years, and it's still super soft. It still keeps its shape. It still fits well around the neck and around the waist. Like, it is a great t-shirt. And, you know, gentlemen prefer great t-shirts. You know, gentlemen have an appreciation for great t-shirts and great hoodies, and that's what you're going to find at HomefieldApparel.com. And best of all, we're going to give you 15% off your first order at HomefieldApparel.com. Use the promo code PITT24, PITT24. Is that right? Or is it PITT 2024? I got to check. Hold on. I'm pretty sure it's PITT 24. Let's go with promo code PITT24. Okay. You would think I would know that off the top of my head before I even sit down. 15% off your first order at HomefieldApparel.com with promo code PITT24. PITT24. 15% off your first order of the best college sports gear you're going to find. Of course, while you're here, like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and check out the website Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Right now, you can get a full year of Pitt sports coverage at Panther-Lair.com for 60% off. Ridiculous sale right now. Go to Panther-Lair.com, sign up with the promo code KICKOFF2024, and you will get 60% off. Now, this deal only lasts this week. This promotion will end at the end of this week. So if you want to get the best Pitt sports coverage for the entire football season, the entire basketball season, all the recruiting that happens between now and next August, this is the time to do it. 60% off. Promo code KICKOFF2024. KICKOFF 2024. You can't lose with that. It's the best Pitt coverage, best Pitt community, and we're giving it to you for 60% off. It's a ridiculous sale. I actually got to reach out. Like, what are we doing? Why are we giving this stuff away for so cheap? It's crazy. All right, let's talk linebackers. I mean, I've talked about this group so often through the offseason. I've talked about it, throughout the spring, the hype for this group. I talked about it throughout the summer, the hype for this group. And then since training camp has started, as we've seen these guys move around, we've seen how they look, how their bodies look, how they're playing, and how camp is going for them. I've continued to talk about it, and I don't think we've really moved off of anything. You know, the one maybe change in my projections for the linebackers is that now I have Rasheem Biles ahead of Braylon Lovelace. But I think both of those guys are going to play. I think we projected Brandon George and Key Thompson at middle linebacker, Kyle Lewis and Jordan Bass at star linebacker, Rasheem Biles and Braylon Lovelace at the money linebacker. I thought Lovelace would be the starter, but I think Biles is ahead of him. Either way, they're all going to play, and I think they're all going to play a lot, throughout the course of the season. And on top of it, maybe best of all, I think they're all going to play rather well. There's an element of inexperience. I think last year, Braylon Lovelace, Jordan Bass, Rasheem Biles, Kyle Lewis, none of these guys played 200 snaps on defense last year. Lewis played the most. He played 177. Lovelace played 160. Bass played 114. And Biles played like 8 or something like that snaps on defense. But he made up for it on special teams with like 3 blocked punts. So, yeah, you take the playmaking potential with Jordan Bass, even though he hasn't done it a lot on defense. Brandon George and Key Thompson, obviously both very experienced players. George played 300 snaps last year. 200 3 years ago. He's played a bunch. Key Thompson has played a lot over the course of his career at Ohio before he transferred to Pitt this spring. So you've got experience up the middle, but your outside linebackers, Lewis and Bass and Lovelace and Biles, are going to be rather inexperienced. But I think they're going to be really good because they're athletic players. And we've talked about all the attributes. We talked about the athleticism, the speed, and the playmaking ability, and Pitt recruiting a certain type of player. Excuse me. I apologize if I sound a little bit under the weather. We're partying like it's 2020 up in here these days at the Panther-Lair.com offices. So I apologize if I have to like blow my nose or cough or if I just sound bad. We've talked about all the attributes for those guys, about what we think they can do, why we think they'll do it well, and on and on. But what's interesting to me is the question of depth, of whether this is the deepest group of linebackers Pitt has had. Because you look over the years, there have been some pretty lean years. There was, the 2017 season, they only had 3 linebackers who played more than 200 snaps. And actually, they only had 3 linebackers who played triple-digit snaps. Sean Idowu, Salim Brightwell, and Elijah Zeiss played pretty much all of the snaps. Zeiss had the least out of those 3. He played 676 snaps. The next most snaps for a linebacker was Elias Reynolds with 99. So pretty shallow rotation that year. They only played 12 games, and also all 3 of those guys stayed healthy. Idowu, Brightwell, and Zeiss. But a pretty shallow rotation that year. You fast forward to, obviously in 2018, 2021, you had more linebackers playing 200 plus snaps because you had 14 game seasons. But even let's take some examples. 2019 is a good example. You had 5 linebackers play 200 plus snaps. Kylan Johnson and Salim Brightwell and Cam Bright and Phil Campbell played the most, and then Chase Pine snuck in like 208 snaps behind them. Even go back to 2015. In 2015, they had 4 linebackers play 200 plus snaps. 2016, they had 6 linebackers actually play 200 plus snaps. I think there was an injury at some point that kind of moved guys around. Maybe Quentin Virginis, he only played 258 snaps, and Salim Brightwell played 210. You still had your guys at the top. Matt Galambos played the most. Sean Idowu was right behind him, and then Mike Caprera. And then there was sort of a break to get down to Bam Bradley and so on. But aside from there's a couple elements here. There's just sort of overall, what group do we think is the best? What group of linebackers do we think is just the best overall performing group of linebackers? And then there's the matter of, how many are going to play? How deep is the position group? So it's talent and depth. And that I think a lot of the talent and depth on this year's roster. Well, let's look back. So, you go to the 2015 season, basically your main 3 starters were Mike Caprera, Matt Galambos, and Nicholas Grigsby. A year later, Caprera, Galambos, and Sean Idowu. 2017, you had, like I mentioned, Salim Brightwell in the middle with Idowu and Zeiss next to him. 2018, Quentin Virginis and Elias Reynolds both played in the middle. Idowu and Zeiss were on the outside. 2019, which I mentioned, Salim Brightwell, your middle linebacker. Phil Campbell and Kylan Johnson as the outside linebackers. Kylan Johnson, one of those sort of, I don't know if I would say forgotten guys, but I don't think Pitt fans think about him very much. He was here for just 1 year. He was like a 1-year rental player before it was cool to do so. There was pre-transfer portal. came in as a transfer from Florida and ended up leading all linebackers in snaps. I don't know if he led all linebackers in tackles or not, but he was a good player. He was a productive player, and it did well for Pitt in that 1 year. It was sort of a weird year, kind of a forgettable year a little bit at the 2019 season. 7-5, got to 8-5 with a win over Eastern Michigan. But Kylan Johnson, I think, was one of the bright spots that year. Paris Ford, Kylan Johnson. I mean, really, that defense came into its own in 2019. And I think last week I talked about the Tier 1 defenses under Narduzzi, Tier 2 defenses. The Tier 1 defenses under Pat Narduzzi, I think, were 2019 and 2020. 19 was that year when it really first started blowing up with the defensive ends coming into their own. Good linebacker play led by Kylan Johnson. And then, obviously, Paris Ford and DeMar Hamlin really excelling. I think, I'm trying to think of the corners, Pinnock and Dane Jackson, maybe. I'd have to go back and look at that. But the defense really kind of came into its own that year, and Kylan Johnson was a pretty big part of that. 2020, the COVID year, the shortened year, they had Chase Pine in the middle, Wendell Davis also playing in the middle there. Got a decent number of snaps, played some. Actually, no, he got hurt 2 games in. And then I think Chase Pine had to take over, but Cam Bright and Phil Campbell were on the outside. Bright and Campbell on the outside in 2021, the ACC championship year, with Servassier Dennis as the starter. Dennis returned in 22 with Bengali Kamara and Shane Simon outside of him. And then last year, Simon in the middle with Kamara and DeShields around him. So I just threw a lot of names. I mean, it's a lot of the same names, right? It's Mac Alambos, Mike Caprera, Sean Idowu, Elijah Zeiss, Salim Brightwell, Phil Campbell, Cam Bright, Servassier Dennis. I mean, those are like the 8 main guys with Chase Pine kind of in there, Quentin Virginis kind of in there. But those are like the 8 main guys up until the last 2 years when Kamara, DeShields, and Shane Simon kind of got in the mix. So, I mean, you're talking about 10 or 11 linebackers over the course of 9 seasons who really played the bulk of the snaps, were the main starters, more or less lines up and kind of makes sense. Which group there, is there a group there that stands out to you where I just say those names and they sound better than what we think Brandon George, Kyle Lewis, and Rasheem Biles will do this year? Throwing in Key Thompson, Jordan Bass, and Braylon Lovelace behind them. I'm not sure there is. Like, what was the best group here of those groups I just mentioned? I mean, probably, 2019 with Kylan Johnson, Salim Brightwell, and Phil Campbell. 2021 with Cam Bright, Servassier Dennis, and Phil Campbell. Again, with Brandon George backing up Dennis and Chase Pine as a backup and John Patrician as a backup. And that's a pretty talented, pretty deep group. That might be the best group. I might say. 2019, Servassier Dennis wasn't really ready yet. He was a freshman. He played a little bit, and it didn't really go. So I think he gave up like a wheel route to Ohio or something like that, and that was one of the last times we saw him on the field that year. 2021 might have been the best group of linebackers, though, with Bright, Dennis, and Campbell backed up by Patrician, George, and Pine. And I think that's the group that this year's group is going to have to be compared to. I think that's the group that this year's group is going to, at the end of the season, we'll look back and we'll say, did they live up to that? Were they as good as, Cam Bright, Servassier Dennis, and Phil Campbell were? And one way we'll get an idea is postseason. Because 2021 and 22, really, Servassier Dennis is the only Pitt linebacker to have earned all conference honors. 2021, he was a second-team pick. 2022, he was a first-team pick. He's also the only linebacker under Pat Narduzzi to get drafted. Went in the 5th round last year, which I always think is sort of a remarkable number. Sometimes I'll bring up some of these all-conference things or draft pick things. Paris Ford is the only Pitt defensive back to get first-team all-conference honors. No Pitt cornerback has ever been a first-team selection. They've only had 2 second-team selections at cornerback, despite having 5 corners drafted. I always like to drop that out there, and the fact that Pitt has only ever had 1 linebacker drafted under Pat Narduzzi, which maybe says something about the caliber of linebackers that they've had. Now, I don't know if that number is going to change. I mean, after this season, it would be Brandon George and Key Thompson. I don't know if one of those guys will get drafted or not. I don't know if they'll end up with an all-conference selection, first team or second team out of this group. I think some guys have a chance. I think Kyle Lewis has a chance to get the kind of production you would need to get recognized for an all-conference team. I wouldn't be surprised if Biles, Lovelace, or Bass play at a high level. I don't know if any of them are going to get to all-conference level. But it's still, regardless of that, it's remarkable that over the last 9 seasons, Pitt's only had one guy who's been able to get that kind of all-conference recognition. And it's SirVocea Dennis both times, doing it on the second team in 2021, first team on 2022. This group this year is all about the potential. And this is something else that's sort of remarkable. Most years under Narduzzi, from year to year, they've had multiple guys coming back who played at least 200 snaps the previous season. Like 2016, Matt Galambos, Mike Caprera, and Bam Bradley all had played 200-plus snaps in 2015. 2017, Idowu and Brightwell all played 200-plus snaps the previous year. They really only had the 2019 season was the last time. Well, it was one of just 2 times when they only had one guy coming back who played 200 snaps the previous year. In 2019, Salim Brightwell had played 300 snaps, actually, the year prior, and he was the only one, though, coming back in 2019 who had that kind of experience. And then in 2022, SirVocea Dennis was actually the only linebacker returning with 200-plus snaps from the previous season. They lost a lot of guys after that 2021 season. Phil Campbell moved on. John Patricia moved on. Cam Bright transferred. Chase Pine was out of eligibility. Wendell Davis transferred like mid-year. Brandon George was back. He didn't play in 22, or he missed most of the season due to injury, but he played less than 200 snaps in 21. So they had limited returning experience. And this year is sort of the same thing. They only have one guy in this year's linebacking core who played 200-plus snaps for Pitt last season. Now, Key Thompson obviously played a lot, but as far as guys who played for Pitt last season, Brandon George is the only one. He had 297 snaps in Pitt's defense last year. So you don't have a lot of that returning experience, and that's really the biggest knock on this group is the experience level. Because they seem to have a lot of other elements, and they've got a bunch of guys, and I think they'll all play. I think they'll all get on the field and play a lot of snaps, and this will be a healthy, well-rested, heavy rotation position for Pitt, and I think a pretty productive one. Could it be Pat Narduzzi's best linebacker group? I think so. Did I probably say this last year at this time? Probably. Am I going to learn my lesson and stop overhyping Pitt's linebackers, particularly the outside linebackers? No, not a chance. I hyped them up last year. Didn't exactly work out. I'm going to do it again this year, and I think it will work out. I think, Kyle Lewis is a guy, I've talked about this a bunch of times. He's a guy that the Pitt coaches have been excited about since he got to Pitt. They were really excited about the trio they signed last year with Biles, Bass, and Lovelace, and I think all of those guys lived up to it. Lived up to the coaches' expectations through their freshman seasons. And now I think the expectation is they will be playing at a high level this year. So I'm pretty excited about this group. I think they have a chance by the end of the year that we'll look back and say that was the best group of linebackers Pat Narduzzi's had. And eligibility-wise, everybody except, the 4 outside linebackers, some of them could play in the middle, but all 4 of those guys will have eligibility remaining to come back to Pitt again next year. So it's a pretty good situation, I think, for Pitt at linebacker right now, and maybe the best chance to be the best situation they've had under Pat Narduzzi. Listen, don't forget, promo code KICKOFF 2024 will get you 60% off the best Pitt coverage that you're going to find at Panther-Lair.com. Pitt24 is the promo code for home field. Homefieldapparel.com is the place you can get 15% off your first order with that promo code Pitt24. Got lots of discounts, lots of sales for you because the college football season is coming and everybody's excited. So take advantage of those. Get 60% off your subscription at Panther-Lair.com, 15% off your first order at Home Field. And if you forget any of those promo codes, just ask me on Twitter and I will remind you multiple times. So Go check it out. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope your week is off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.